It is politics that dominates at the top of this hour, and particularly governing party politics. The ANC says the step-aside rule must not be personalized. Party spokesperson Pule Mabe says the principle is not just about Secretary General Ace Magashule. To weigh in, we are joined via Zoom by Mdumiseni Ntuli, who is the provincial secretary for the ANC in Kwazulu Natal. And Mr. Ntuli, thank you so much for joining me at this hour. Just your broader sense of reaction to the decisions taken by the National Executive Committee of the ANC, particularly if we focus on those decisions that have to do with implementation of conference resolutions around the Integrity Commission, as well as this principle that once you are charged with corruption and other serious crimes, you should step aside.
Well, thank you very much, Tula Silva. Good afternoon to you and fellow viewers of ENCA. Well, certainly the National Executive Committee over the past weekend had to reflect on the process that we must evolve in order to respond to the National Conference decision, which was later reaffirmed by the National Executive Committee through the development of the guidelines that are intended to regulate what is called the stepping aside decision of the National Conference. So the NEC agreed that firstly, we adopted the guidelines in February early this year, and yesterday all we had to do was to then determine the time frame within which the guidelines implementation is going to be rolled out. And the President announced it later in the evening that all our comrades who happen to be in conflict with the law will have to ensure that they abide by the decision of the National Conference and the NEC within the period of 30 days from today. And this period is essentially to allow the ANC to do what is called a refinement of technical areas within the guidelines, which are important so that we have uniformity across the country.
This has implications for you as a province, doesn't it? I mean, in terms of the high-profile cases, and don't get me wrong, those are not the only cases involving some of your members and some of people in your leadership, but high-profile cases in your province include Zandile Gumede, as well as your deputy chairperson in the province, Magashule.
That's correct. The decision of the National Executive Committee was not essentially a decision that had to be taken in consideration to specific names. It's a decision that is a matter of principle. Anybody that happens to have his name affected or affected in one way or the other is essentially a coincidence. The decision is a decision that is emanating from a conference decision, a resolution, and it's a principled position adopted by the National Executive Committee. All other names that will be affected are, as I say, essentially a coincidence in our own view as the National Executive Committee.
Sure, coincidence, but let's go through them, well, at least the main ones, one at a time. Is it your expectation now that Zandile Gumede will step aside from the position to which you reinstated her in the provincial legislature?
The statement of the National Executive Committee says all members of the ANC, without exception. Of course, part of what the meeting with the national officials and chairpersons and secretaries of provinces will endeavor to respond to is how do we deal with circumstances where comrades had already appeared before provincial integrity commissions, certain determinations were made which were later adopted by various provincial executive committees across the country. That's why we would have this meeting, because we have to harmonize our understanding and refine our processes such that there is no way in which a decision of the highest organ of our movement would be perceived to be undermined or not to be adhered to by any of our structures.
Are you specifically making reference to the Magashule matter, where the Provincial Integrity Commission last year in October decided that, he can resume his duties as deputy chairperson of the province, this while at the same time actually factually, in terms of court processes, he's set to go on trial in September this year?
There's quite a number of comrades in KZN who are in that situation. It's not necessarily our provincial deputy chairperson alone. I think there's quite about 8, if not 9 of comrades whose cases the decision of the Integrity Commission had said that they must be permitted to continue their work. And what we need to finalize in the meeting with the national officials is the implication of the recent NEC decision on such matters. And I'm quite certain that we will find a way in which we implement the NEC decision in a manner that is not going to that is going to enforce some level of consistency and ensuring that the ANC's character of a unitary organization is adhered to.
Just on the RET forces as a faction within the ANC, Mdumiseni Ntuli, what is your sense in KZN as one of the provinces, perhaps, that some people would read as perhaps being a potential staging ground for some of the factional fights in the battle for the heart and soul of the ANC that has been raging for some time? Do you believe the RET forces has been dismantled following this NEC meeting and some of these decisions that have been taken, and the directive that says no ANC member should associate with the RET forces or aid or abet some of their activities?
You see, Tula Sizwe, the last national conference of the ANC adopted a resolution on what is called radical socio-economic transformation, which is a policy position of the African National Congress that we are required to implement, and that the NEC will have to account at the next conference in terms of how far we've gone. I have a problem with us characterizing some of our comrades who are ill-disciplined and associating them with a resolution of the ANC. The fact that they define themselves as RET forces, I don't think that the ANC should formally embrace that language, because it's a diversion. It has an intention, firstly, to weaken the essence and the importance of the resolution of the organization about the need to ensure that we deliberately transfer the ownership of the economy into the hands of the poor, and the majority of which are black people in general and Africans in particular. So I don't think that we must give them some kind of a dignified characterization. These are comrades who are ill-disciplined, who are not happy with one thing or the other within the organization, and they've decided to define themselves in that particular way. And if we pursue them with that definition, the possibility is that we may end up denigrating some aspects of the ANC National Conference resolution, which we should not do. Let's not glorify wrongdoing and even name it. But we agree with the NEC position that the comrades who have defined themselves in that way must never be allowed, must never be permitted to divide the organization, and nobody must be seen to be associated with them. Failure to which they must be taken to a DC so that they can account for their seats.
How, as a last question to you, Mdumiseni Ntuli, how should one of your members in KZN, one Jacob Zuma of Nkandla, Gwadunuse, Homestead, how should he receive and respond to the message from the NEC, National Executive Committee, around respect for the judiciary and support and assistance to the Zondo Commission? What would be your advice as his leaders in the province around how to respond to what has been said now?
Well, firstly, President Zuma attended the meeting of the National Executive Committee, or maybe not all the days, but part of it. And as a disciplined member of the ANC, he would be interested to know the outcomes of the NEC. And I'm quite certain that he would read the statement of the NEC. And we would expect him, like any other member of the ANC, to act in a manner that is consistent with the position adopted by his organization and the highest organ of the ANC. We are not very concerned about President Zuma having a potential of being ill-disciplined or disregarding ANC resolution. You see, President Zuma is the first member of the ANC, senior leader of the ANC, who, when there were issues around him, voluntarily decided to step aside and and requested the ANC to allow him to address his own difficulties and challenges.
He actually did. Absolutely, you're right. Yeah.
Yes, we believe that even at this stage, this is one of the senior members of the ANC who understand what is attended to them as members of the NEC and as a former leader of our movement.
All right, thank you for that, Mdumiseni Ntuli, the provincial secretary of the ANC in Kwazulu Natal, and he makes the point that former President Jacob Zuma did actually step aside. He was deputy president of the ANC at the time. When he was charged, he did step aside, something that predates the NASREC conference resolution on stepping aside. But today, it just seems so difficult to actually do, and people fight over it for 3 years and are not able to move and move forward.